What does the avoidant partner get out of the relationship? Why do they come back at all? Perhaps you have felt it. They vanish in a swirl of final-sounding words, only to reappear as though pulled by a gravitational force they deny yet cannot resist. Why? Of what possible benefit is it to them, these stoic rolling stones, to slip back into your arms after they insisted freedom was their only solace? We will delve into this seemingly contradictory dance of avoidance, highlighting that curious question. If intimacy feels so suffocating, if vulnerability feels so risky, what is it that the avoidant partner actually gains? And after all those tense departures, why on earth do they come back? We shall traverse childhood echoes, the illusions of love, the caretaker phenomenon, and the surprising comfort an avoidant finds in a lover's open heart, even if that same closeness once triggered them to run. In effect, we will investigate how avoidants become entangled in a paradoxical push and pull, sustaining relationships that appear painful or unfulfilling on the surface, yet hold them in place for reasons that run far deeper than mere convenience. Let us begin with an image. Two people locked in a cosmic waltz. One stands with arms outstretched, longing for closeness. Call this person the anxious or the open heart. The other, arms partly extended, partly retracted, is the avoidant or rolling stone. The avoidant appears halfway in, halfway out of the embrace, uncertain whether to partake or flee. The anxious partner, even if it hurts, remains steadfast. But how do we interpret the mind of that avoidant who so often claims to find love too much, too stifling, yet refuses to cut the cord entirely? One explanation is indeed quite simple. The avoidant loves the taste of love. They want contact, that intangible warmth we all yearn for. They want the emotional intoxication of someone caring about them, longing for them, merging with them, but not so thoroughly that it undoes their sense of personal space. That boundary, that safe domain, remains critical. The moment closeness tips from comfortable to frightening, they retreat. So, ironically, they keep themselves perched on a fence, hungry enough to want affection, but frightened enough to sabotage deeper contact. This stasis keeps them nibbling on closeness, like a delicacy they never fully ingest. Thus, the avoidant does get something from the relationship, what we might call a taste of love, or fleeting emotional nourishment. They love that part of you which offers genuine warmth. In many ways, the anxious or open-hearted partner brings an aliveness they find deeply magnetic, an energy that highlights aspects of themselves they have never quite integrated, even as they bristle at how that same aliveness can threaten their emotional boundaries. They keep returning for another sampling. Indeed, one might say the avoidant's entire stance is, I crave, yet I fear. The result is a cyclical pattern of approach and withdrawal. Now, we must look back, far back, into the avoidant's childhood. Picture a child whose household dynamic demanded emotional independence from an early age. They might have grown up with a caregiver who was either enmeshed, making the child feel consumed by adult demands, or dismissive, training the child to handle their own problems, discouraging excessive expressions of need. In either scenario, the child concluded that the safest path to emotional survival was to self-regulate, to detach from the swirling intensity of close relationships, all while longing for a gentleness they believed was either fleeting or conditional. They learned that vulnerability can be co-opted by a parent who merges with them in unhealthy ways, or they learned that vulnerability is cause for scorn. They learned that emotional independence was the only ironclad guarantee that they would not be overwhelmed. Over years, that lesson hardened into a worldview. No one can be fully trusted. True safety lies in controlling my own emotional domain. So by the time they reach adulthood, they are fluent in self-reliance but starved for genuine intimacy, and thoroughly ambivalent about letting themselves need anyone. In the presence of your love, they sense a possibility of fulfilling that hunger. They see your open heart and how it might fill the unloved corners of their soul. Yet each step closer triggers the primal memory. Closeness can devour your sense of self. They do not necessarily articulate it so clearly, but in their mind, the old fear flares. So ironically, they do see the relationship as beneficial. It offers them the closeness they've forever lacked, but they can only handle so much. Whenever the closeness surpasses their internal threshold, they retreat to restore safety. Over and over they do this. One might mention the concept of a narcissistic wound, which can underlie all insecure attachment styles. When we say narcissistic wound, we do not necessarily mean the person is a raging narcissist, only that a portion of their sense of self relies on external validation or control. Because the avoidant is not truly whole in self-acceptance, they derive some sense of identity from being seen in a certain way. The caretaker partner with the open heart is a perfect mirror, always giving, praising, yearning. The avoidant relishes that mirror, that sense of being sought after. That's a subtle yet potent payoff. They might think they are disgusted by neediness, but ironically, there is a secret gratification in being the object of someone's unrelenting devotion. It can feed their sense of worth, an oddly humbling yet hubristic dynamic. I cannot handle your closeness, but your pursuit of me reaffirms that I am valuable. Hence, they do come back, at least in part because they do not wish to lose that reflection of their significance. They have structured a worldview. I am strong. I do not require anyone. But like an ember in the dark, they do need recognition of that strength, the comfort of being chosen. Being chosen by you, the anxious caretaker, reassures them they are lovable. Yet the moment your love demands reciprocation at a deeper level, the moment it knocks on the door of merging or co-living or deeper daily vulnerability, they recoil, reactivating their vow of self-sufficiency. Then the old cycle replays. There is another dimension at play. If an avoidant partner grew up in a merged or enmeshed family system, then that child from a young age felt as if personal boundaries scarcely existed. Perhaps a parent leaned on them heavily for emotional support, overshadowing the child's autonomy. Or a parent might have intruded upon every decision, leaving no mental space for the child to flourish independently. The child learned that closeness equals entrapment, that being loved could mean being devoured. So in adulthood, the smell of intense closeness is both alluring, for love, at some level, is always alluring, and terrifying, for fear of losing themselves again. So yes, they might like the taste of love but find it too scary, a statement that ironically sums up the paradox neatly. But let's push further. If it is so scary, you might wonder, why do they not simply end it once and for all? If the anxious caretaker is presumably too much, why not vanish for good? Because the thirst for that bright, affirming presence does not die. They get lonely. They glimpse others drifting in happily connected relationships, or remember fleeting warm moments with you. They discover the emptiness of their fortress. Then, propelled by an ache they dare not name, they test the waters again. They reappear with a subtle knock. How have you been? Or, I miss you. You, bewildered, have your heart lurch. Wait, after everything you are back. Because, dear friend, they never truly left their longing behind. Let us not forget, the caretaker partner, often anxious, plays a crucial role. The avoidant sees in them a wellspring of unconditional acceptance. The caretaker's willingness to endure the avoidant's distance, to remain patient, to keep an open heart, offers something the avoidant rarely allows themselves: emotional safety. But paradoxically, the avoidant cannot fully drink from that well, for fear it might entrap them. So they take sips, never quite quenching their thirst. Still, those sips keep them from leaving entirely. Additionally, many anxious caretaker types provide an environment where the avoidance illusions remain unchallenged. The caretaker ends up contorting themselves to not frighten the avoidant away, carefully rationing requests for closeness, tiptoeing around conflict. This ultimately rewards the avoidant for partial engagement. The caretaker does so out of love or fear of losing the relationship. But ironically, it also cements the avoidant sense that partial engagement suffices. The caretaker becomes the silent stagehand, always cleaning the emotional stage for the avoidant's next entrance. Now, we must not imagine the avoidant is purely manipulative or unconcerned with genuine love. Often they do care. They stand in awe of the caretaker's warmth, occasionally letting themselves be lulled into real closeness. Indeed, for a fleeting moment, they might feel safe enough to put down their shield. In that state, they might say, "You know, I do love you deeply," or "I can picture a future with you," or "I never realized how much I needed you." Then, in a swirl of confusion, they sense a creeping vulnerability that threatens their sense of self. The warmth crosses an invisible threshold, and they yank the shutters closed once more. So yes, the avoidant has a genuine emotional stake. They do come back because they sense that with you, they experience something raw, something once withheld from them as children. They get to see love in action, unwavering, nurturing, vibrant. They might disclaim, "I'm not made for big romance," yet they slip into your sphere once they can no longer bear the dryness of their solitude. We might also observe a phenomenon of rationalization. The avoidant mind is adept at spinning narratives. "I left because this was too intense," or "I'm returning because I realize they do get me." Lather, rinse, repeat. They might keep telling themselves that if only the caretaker were a tad less clingy, or if life circumstances were different, they would stay for good. But the root remains: fear of enmeshment. They don a hero's cloak of independence, believing they must preserve it at all costs, while quietly wanting someone to see them, to admire them, to embrace them at least from a safe remove. If you identify as the anxious caretaker, you might wonder how you factor into this. Am I just a caretaker figure they use for fleeting comfort? Or is there something more profound? The truthful answer is rarely black and white. Indeed, you do feed a vital emotional reservoir for them. But also, there is often a legitimate synergy between your giving nature and their cautious heart. People meet for reasons both cosmic and mundane, forging a link that, if carefully managed, can lead to real transformation for both parties. Yet the caretaker must remain vigilant about self-care. If you cling so tightly that you sacrifice your own emotional well-being, the dynamic devolves into a cycle of codependency, stunting growth on both sides. Meanwhile, the avoidant must gradually face the illusions that keep them half in, half out. Only then can the relationship graduate from "they come back because it's comfortable or they get a bit lonely" to "they choose to stay because they recognize genuine love and commit to nurturing it." A critical concept to highlight is the difference between healthy closeness and enmeshment. Avoidants who grew up in families with blurred boundaries develop a skewed association. Closeness equals sign merging. Merging equals sign losing one's identity. But healthy closeness does not devour the self. It allows mutual support, with each person's individuality intact. The caretaker can assure them that loving someone is not a vow to swallow them whole. Ironically, a truly boundaried relationship, where each partner respects the other's personal space, emotional needs, and identity, can offer more comfort to an avoidant than they initially believe possible. But to trust that arrangement, they must confront the default childhood script that lumps all closeness into danger. One cannot ignore the heartbreak these push-pull dynamics cause. Each time the avoidant re-enters your life with a new flourish of hope, only to later retreat, it chips away at the caretaker's sense of stability. They might ask themselves, "If you truly want me, why do you vanish?" Or, "What are you getting out of this, if not to torment me or keep me as a backup?" The gloom is that from the avoidant's vantage point, they are not necessarily using you as a backup. They see themselves as responding to their genuine longing whenever they can handle it, then succumbing to panic when they cannot. The caretaker's heartbreak, while real, is an unintended byproduct of that internal war. Still, heartbreak stings no less for being unintentional. Over time, the caretaker might come to resent or distrust the avoidant, wondering if every new approach is but a fleeting moment. The repeated heartbreak can overshadow genuine affection. This is often how relationships crumble, under the weight of cyclical disappointment. The caretaker eventually concludes that no matter how many times the avoidant returns, the outcome never changes. But let us not consign the story to tragedy alone. Some avoidant caretaker couples break their cyclical curse. The key often lies in therapeutic or personal growth that addresses core wounds, helps the avoidant see that boundaries need not be rigid walls but flexible lines, and shows the caretaker how to stand firm in self-love so that giving does not become overgiving. The caretaker can learn to hold space for the avoidant's independence without enabling their fear-based escapism. The avoidant can learn to let themselves lean on the caretaker from time to time, or at least communicate before shutting down. Will it be easy? Rarely. This brand of healing demands introspection. The avoidant must risk vulnerability while the caretaker must risk stepping back, not chasing so fervently. Growth emerges in the tension, in the willingness to let illusions of independence or illusions of rescue fall away, revealing an authentic partnership. Then, the question, why do they come back, transforms into, how can we both choose to come back wholeheartedly for the right reasons with eyes wide open? Imagine a story, a cautious moth drawn to a lantern's glow. The lantern flickers warmly, welcoming the moth's presence. Time after time, the moth flutters close, savoring the light's promise of comfort. But the instant the warmth intensifies, the moth recoils, fearful of burning its delicate wings. Then, in the darkness, it recalls the solace that light provided. So back it goes, again and again, never quite settling, never quite staying away. This, in miniature, encapsulates the avoidance conundrum. They are mesmerized by the shining possibility you represent, yet haunted by old caution. If I get too close, I lose myself. If I stay too far, I starve in darkness. To the caretaker lantern, the pattern can feel exhausting, unfair. If you want to remain safe, then be gone, you might say. Why come close if you do not truly want to be here? The moth's only reply, I want your light, yet fear your flame. Of course, a real relationship is far more nuanced than a winged insect's flight. Still, the parallel stands. The avoidant partner does get something, a taste of that luminous warmth, and that is why they cannot fully leave. They come back because the emptiness of consistent isolation eventually grows unbearable. They come back because your presence reawakens their capacity for wonder. They come back because beneath that veneer of stoicism, they nurse a private longing to be held, recognized, and maybe, just maybe, understood. If you are the caretaker facing your avoidance repeated returns, you must weigh how to proceed. Are you content with partial closeness? Do you find you can handle the cyclical nature without losing your own equilibrium? If so, you might navigate this dynamic with careful boundaries. Or do you yearn for deeper reciprocity, the sort of emotional presence your avoidant partner may not be prepared to give unless they do real work? Then you must consider if continuing as is will only deepen your wounds. Compassion for them, understanding their fear does matter, but not at the expense of ignoring your own emotional health. One of the caretaker's biggest tasks is to realize you cannot single-handedly fix an avoidant's deep-seated terror of enmeshment or vulnerability. You can only model a more secure approach and hope they are inspired to follow. If they refuse, it may fall on you to step away, however painful, to preserve your sense of self. So to circle back to that central question, what does the avoidant partner get out of the relationship? Why do they come back at all? The short answer, in essence, they taste the euphoria of being wanted, an affirmation of their worth. especially if they harbor a narcissistic wound that craves external validation. They gain fleeting emotional intimacy they might secretly crave but fear sustaining. They find comfort in a caretaker's stable, open heart, which stands in contrast to the stoic independence they cling to. They alleviate loneliness that inevitably arises once they are alone for too long, no matter how strongly they claim to prefer solitude. They re-engage with a reflection of a part of themselves they have suppressed or never learned to nurture, the part that wants warmth and acceptance. They confirm they have not failed at love entirely. If the caretaker welcomes them back, it soothes the panic that they are irredeemably unlovable. Of course, these gains come with emotional torment for both sides. The caretaker's well of patience is not infinite, and the avoidance fear is never truly quelled by these fleeting reunions. If they do not address the underlying conflict, the cycle inevitably continues. In time, either the caretaker or the avoidant might say, "Enough." Enough of the half measures, the heartbreak, the illusions. For the avoidant, that might look like a resolution to stand still in the face of their fear, to let themselves be seen and needed. For the caretaker, it might mean stepping back, not to punish, but to ensure the avoidant experiences the reality of losing that bright warmth if they do not meet you halfway. Breaking the cycle requires disruption, be it gentle or abrupt, some new boundary or some heartfelt conversation that brings the patterns to light. Should the avoidant rise to the challenge, and some do, they may discover that the love they sporadically taste can be far richer if allowed to flourish consistently. They may realize that letting themselves rely on another from time to time does not annihilate their sense of identity. Conversely, if they choose to remain locked behind the old illusions, no caretaker on earth can lure them out for good. You might see brief improvements, a golden interlude, only to watch them vanish again once the dreaded vulnerability re-emerges. Let us keep a gentle heart for the avoidance predicament. They are not mere puzzle box lovers to amuse us with their unpredictability. They are people shaped by a lifetime of signals that closeness is dangerous or suffocating. But closeness is also incredibly enticing. It offers an intangible sweetness they yearn for, even while disclaiming it. So they come back, again and again, because part of them hopes the sweetness can be savored in small measures, enough to quench the worst of their loneliness without drowning them. They are the moth, you are the lantern, or vice versa, in the final analysis. It is up to both to rewrite that script if the pattern is to transform. Why then do they remain? Because on some level, they do love. They do glean intangible value from the interplay. They do see the caretaker as a harbor of safety, ironically enough. Even if that safety terrifies them, they do want to know someone who can cut through the solitude. Indeed, the avoidant's entire existence is bound up in wanting while resisting, a paradox that can either lead to shared growth or cyclical heartbreak. And so, dear listener, we have addressed that cardinal question. What does the avoidant partner get out of the relationship? Why do they come back at all? They get precisely that fragile, shimmering fragment of love that manages to slip past their defenses. They come back because, despite everything, that shimmering fragment ignites a light they cannot find alone. But in tasting it, they also feel the edges of old wounds, leading them to pull away before the closeness fully blossoms. The only true resolution is for them to face down that deep fear and for you, the caretaker, to define how deeply you choose to invest in the hope that they will stand by your side once they see that love need not swallow them whole. Whether or not you remain, never forget, you are not the cause of their fear. Their war rages within them, shaped by childhood, fueled by illusions of independence. You, in your open-hearted generosity, have merely been the one bright enough to draw them near. If they do not do the work, you need not accept ongoing heartbreak for the sake of ephemeral, hot moments. If they do, perhaps there is space for a mutual transformation, a shared love that stands firm, no longer overshadowed by the ghosts of the past. And that is the gentle truth. Where you go from here, and whether the avoidant can truly open themselves to staying for reasons beyond fleeting desire, is a journey that depends on each soul's courage. May your own path be guided by clarity, by self-respect, and by the knowledge that real love, for all its potential pain, is far too precious to be rationed out in half measures and partial visits from someone who has yet to make peace with their own heart.
If you believe this video might help someone dear to you, share it with them. A small gesture on your part could mean the world to a friend in need.